Hi everybody, welcome back to CineDB Insights. This is an offspring of the CineDB.Africa conversation series, a series of in-depth encounters with film professionals from the continent that was developed by a group of African curators as part of the CineDB.Africa project of the Goethe Institute, which is now accessible through the e-portal of the Durban Filmmart Institute, which is the new home of CineDB Africa. We've been interviewing exciting and exclusive decision makers from the documentary industry. And today I'm super happy to welcome Theresa from Catapult Film Fund. I hope I'm saying the name correctly, with us here today. So hello.
Hi, I'm Theresa, and I am the COO and co-director of Catapult Film Fund. We are an SF-based nonprofit in California, and we provide early stage support for independent documentary films.
So as far as I know, if my research is correct, you're kind of new in this position, but you're not at all new to the audiovisual sector or the movie making sector, maybe more generally. Tell us a little bit about your professional background and what has led you to be in San Francisco working for Catapult Film Fund.
Sure. So I identify as a Panay cultural worker and a working mom, and I was actually born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is traditionally the land stewarded by the Ohlone people. My family came from the Philippines, so they left during the 1980s Marcos dictatorship and immigrated to the San Francisco Bay Area. And this is really, the community that I grew up in. It was a immigrant community with a lot of where storytelling was a really important part of how we kept culture and identity and history alive. And so that had always influenced me and kind of led me to continue a career in media arts, really focusing on storytelling, production, exhibition by, for, and about communities that have been traditionally marginalized here in the States, and really thinking about ideas of power and representation and memory, and how we kind of think about story as a means of accessing this idea of shared humanity. So I began working with an organization in San Francisco called the Center for Asian American Media. And, that's really one of the longest running film festivals that's dedicated to works from that community, through the form of production for public media broadcasts, but as well as a local film festival that played both Asian and Asian American independent cinema. And then from there, I went to, spaces like Hawaii, where I was going to graduate school, but then also was doing work in terms of research and film screenings for the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, and helped with that academic department or academic team to kind of build out organizations like Muslim Societies in Asia, where we're really thinking about stories from that region, storytellers in language, things like that. And it brought me back to the Bay Area, where I started producing independent films, primarily starting with fiction films or scripted independent narratives by Asian American, queer, and femme creators. And through being in that world, it brought me later to New York, where I'd lived for a decade. And I ended up focusing much more on nonfiction. And so that kind of began through short films about social issues through a online film festival that is now defunct called Media That Matters, that was run from Arts Engine. And then working with youth, documentary filmmakers through different organizations that were working out of high schools in the Bronx and Brooklyn and Manhattan. And leading me eventually to the place where I've been for the last 8 years, which is American Documentary. It's most folks know it as the nonprofit behind the longest running nonfiction series on PBS POV, and we also produce POV shorts in America Reframed. So really, thinking about how what are different ways that we can both share, produce, and think about storytelling for the public good.
What is it about documentary filmmaking that kind of caught you, maybe, and let's say kidnapped you from your fiction roots? What do you love about documentaries?
In many ways in the States, particular communities can be observed through a kind of lens or a gaze that's very extractive. Like, I
Mm,
know about you, hence I have power over you,
mm,
especially
mm,
when it comes to this relationship between Asia and the West.
mm,
There's a
mm,
very, as we all know, like Orientalist gaze on like the consumption of culture, right? The consumption, like the flattening of people to these ideas, and so and your earlier question is the idea of humanizing, right? And it's like, I don't need to be humanized, I'm human, and so
yeah.
when I think about when I think about that in terms of what fiction film can do, and what sometimes certain types of nonfiction approaches tend to kind of put a human face or humanize, right? And so to me, that was always kind of the challenge, and I think that's actually what drew me to a place like POV, which is like the humanity, like that's a given.
Mm.
It's the artfulness and the dignity that I appreciated about the styles of the filmmakers who we often would program for this series. It's the idea that like these stories, maybe you know what these headlines are, maybe you're familiar with a particular region of the world or not, but that, the filmmaking is character driven. It's about narrative. It's very rarely like a talking head kind of situation. And you really do feel engrossed in the lives and invested, right? So that when
Mm.
you see that news again, or when you read another article, you're thinking about the person you met,
Mm.
or the artist who, or the filmmaker, who spent the last 4, 5, 8, sometimes longer years, really in this idea of care that in many ways the documentaries that I'm most drawn to are almost like a platform or a vehicle, a tool of resistance or a vehicle for kind of rendering visible the things that were often
Mm.
yeah, maybe left purposely or not out of our view.
So tell us about Catapult Film Fund, what you're doing there, and also a little bit more about the fund itself.
Sure. So I'm very recent. I still have new car smell. I joined in October as the co-director and first chief operations officer. And so, Catapult has been around for 12 years. We are taking on what is called like a co-leadership model. So there isn't an executive director, single executive director for the organization. It's a shared leadership model with my colleague and counterpart, Megan Gelstein, who's the chief programs officer and really oversees our grant programs and our filmmaker-centered programs. And, I really came on board because the organization Catapult was really at this, it's a major milestone where we hit the 10-year mark actually during the pandemic. And I think that really was the moment that our co-founders were thinking about what does the future hold and deciding to kind of move to this co-leadership model and bringing on folks like me and promoting Megan up from programs officer, and her intimate knowledge and her relationships and really reputation in the field is one of the reasons why I wanted to come to Catapult. And I'm really here to kind of think about how we can build out the work we do in an intentional way,
Mm.
um, while also kind of paying attention to kind of the trends and the what's happening in the industry, as well as kind of what are some of the things systemically within the broader, not just nonfiction, but media ecosystem that we're uniquely positioned to address. So for folks who don't know, Catapult, like I mentioned, is a nonprofit, and we're really one of the few organizations that is exclusively dedicated to early stage support for
Mhm.
documentary films. We do that in multiple ways, but our flagship program is our development grant. So we give 20 development grants a year, and this is to filmmakers around the world. And we really are only looking for features, standalone features and shorts, so we're not supporting series at this time. Um, and what we feel proud about with this grant is it's open to all. So it's not specific to particular community or particular region. Anyone can apply from around the world. And then 8 years ago, we began a partnership with True False Film Festival, where we invited 5 film teams to join us every summer for what is called the Rough Cut Retreat. And so this is for film teams who have about a 2-hour cut and are ready. And typically, the profile of the film teams who participate in this program are folks who are still building up their kind of documentary network or ecosystem. This industry, like many industries, it's just really about who you know. And so in this way, it's an opportunity for us to bring newer voices, or maybe folks who maybe not on the periphery, but maybe haven't always kind of been anointed or chosen for some of the other spaces, and connecting them with respected industry professionals. And so it's not just coming in and hanging out, and there is usually like a pool or a body of water, but it really is about there's a retreat. It's really like taking that time off, because we know how lonely the process can be. So some of our mentors, you're kind of paired with a mentor, but the mentors are with you throughout the whole program. Our editors like David Teague, and editor directors like Malika Zuhali Waral, behind Call Me Pichu and Thank You for Playing, and one of our co-founders, Bonnie Cohen, with Actual Films. And so it's a really lovely experience for folks. So those are the two kind of key programs that we've been running for the past few years, that are open actually to international applicants, including and especially African talents.
With the development grants, what kind of are the usual granting amounts? Is it like a flat fee, or does it vary depending on like the total budget? And also it's a grant, right? So you don't have to pay it back.
That's right. So they're non-recoupable grants. So that is the way that we like our financing model is through grant making. The one thing I will say that most folks have questions about is, as a nonprofit, the way that we disperse those grants is through, we have to give to a fiscal sponsor or to some type of nonprofit entity. So that's usually one of the biggest questions people ask. We can't give the film directly to individual artists. So especially for our international filmmakers, just understanding that there will need to be a US-based fiscal sponsor in order to access the funds is an important piece of information. And then to your second question in terms of amount, so there's 20 grants available at $25,000. And then once you become a grantee, you have access to additional funding from Catapult. So we actually provide what is called a momentum grant that you can ask anytime, for any time once you're ready. Once you're at a critical point in the life cycle of your film, you just need that extra boost. So I think those are typically anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 that our grantees can request in addition. And then there's also a smaller, kind of much more focused grant called a consulting grant. And that's typically like if you were going to market and you wanted to bring on a consulting producer or somebody, maybe something very specific like a lawyer or somebody who can just kind of help you with a very tangible aspect of the work.
You're all so generous. That's so nice. And Europe is so confusing to us that we don't have to pay it back. But okay, that's great. And when do you think, so if you're going in for that first development grant, what kind of materials should a filmmaker have already ready? Like when is a good time to approach Catapult?
We use a version of the nonfiction core application. So that's, we're part of a cohort of funders who we're trying to kind of make it a much more equitable process so that you're not having to write a million different applications for a million different funds. There's a standard set of application questions that you can draw from. So ideally that will make it much easier for folks to be able to apply. And then there are, other materials like budget, of course. And again, because this is development and early stage funding, we're not expecting like anything close to a cut of the film. Typically, folks are either showing previous work or they're showing elements of the film that give an idea of where it's going. So it's really, we're asking you to show us the strongest possible sample that relates to kind of the crux of why we should support you for this project to come. And really, those are the primary elements of what we need. What we ask is that, you come to us when you have you've secured access for an idea that you feel really excited about that can uniquely be told through cinema. So, sometimes we'll get applications and it's like, this really sounds much more like a podcast, or it could be anything else. Like, we really want to see in your application why you believe this needs to be told and through the form of nonfiction cinema. We are really interested not just in somebody who is thinking about an issue. We're really committed to storytelling, so we're not looking for a dissertation on why this story is important. We want to hear the story and be engaged in the story that you are uniquely positioned to tell. The purpose of the development grant, if you will, is to be able to produce a fundraising trailer or piece to help you unlock additional funding.
And do you have one granting cycle per year, or do you have multiple deadlines?
Yep. So just last year, we had been rolling for a while, and just last year we switched to 2 rounds per year. So our first round, actually, the deadline applications close on February 13th. So for folks who are watching this, it will likely be after the fact, and then we'll open up another call for applications in the summer. And then for folks who are interested in the Rough Cut retreat, those applications actually open in March, and filmmakers who are selected to participate, we provide basically housing, lodging, as well as travel, a particular amount towards travel, including for international guests. So there is a travel amount available for international guests if that's something that they're selected to do.
Obviously, you haven't just worked at Catapult, and also you're pretty new. So this question can be also for films that maybe you've supported in other ways, but what are your favorite documentaries recently that you've supported or worked on?
When I first found out about the role, I knew about Catapult because it had supported, films like All That Breathes and The Territory. So The Territory was shortlisted. All That Breathes, I think, was just nominated for Best Documentary Feature. And so the other thing I'll say is, because of when we come in, oftentimes Catapult is among the first, if not the first funder on these projects. I've always just been so fascinated by the magic, that it takes to be able to look at an application and say, okay, The Overnighters, if you're familiar with that film, it's like, how can you see that early on before the big reveal at the end for anybody who's familiar with it, that is going to be the film that it turned out. I think one of the first films that Catapult supported was Art and Craft. I think
these
about
are real bangers.
Crip Camp, American Factory, like really coming in early to those films is an amazing thing, and then later on seeing where those films went next. And so and this year at Sundance we had 8 films premiere, including Joe Bridges, Michelle Stevens, Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni project, which is just such an amazing, I've been a fan of both Joe and Michelle for a really long time, and I think this is my favorite of all of their films, and it went on to win the Grand Jury Prize. And then really, the 2 other films at Sundance specifically that I was excited about, I love them all, obviously, love all your babies, but King Cole, Elaine, if you've seen that film or have a chance to see that film, it's really wonderful. And then a film called Tuba Thieves.
I was going to say Tuba Thieves. I love Tuba Thieves. But also, are you dead inside if you don't love Tuba Thieves? If you don't love it, then clearly, there's something wrong with you. But
those are Catapult films, and then I think the films that have really stayed with me from my time with POV. I think what I've always appreciated about POV is just like, you're similar to Catapult. It's like our ability to, or the ability of that series to just really search far and wide and bring some of the best films of the year to American public broadcasting audiences for free. And so, I really loved being able to help present basically the whole body of work of Maite Alberdes, including the Molly. I don't know if folks know this, but American Documentary POV doesn't just distribute films. They also do occasionally come in with co-production funds for international projects. So a film that we're really particularly proud about is Softy, Sam Soko's film Softy. And coming in early to that, I think maybe seeing that at the forum somewhere like Hot Docs or IDFA, but I know it's just that relationship.
It's the infamous Hot Docs pitch. It's and dear watchers, you should ask the producers all about that pitch and all of the things that they unlocked from it. It really can be such a fruitful and beneficial thing to go to the international marketplace when you're ready. Again, which is why I really encourage filmmakers watching to consider to apply to the retreat, because it's really about the network and, you know, infecting people with enthusiasm about your work and your professionalism.
It's really about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, that on the decision maker side, it's how are we getting out of our own way? How are we kind of, and again, not looking and listening and like not trying to um, look for what's hot or new, but really like with humility and with
Mm-hmm.
care, that it's like this idea that, we're a steward for the ecosystem
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a gatekeeper, so I think like the reality is there's limited slots that we have available for our grants, and so what we do with that, we should be mindful with them every time we
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to make it to make that choice,
Mm-hmm.
and on the filmmaker side, as somebody who's also um it's funny, like have never received funding from the organizations and never been acquired by the organizations that I went on to work for
Mm-hmm.
in my previous life as an independent. That being it's not it's kind of a cop out to say put yourself out there, because there's so many barriers to many of
Yeah.
us being out there, but it is about kind of doing that research, having conversations, finding your people. I belong to communities of practice and identity like ADOC and Brown Girls Doc Mafia,
Mm-hmm.
spaces like that are just like how to strengthen numbers, how does kind of finding or either collectives, kind of, they don't have to be traditional or established or entrenched organizations. They can literally be, networks of people who are aligned with you, that have an understanding, like a genuine understanding of your style and what you're trying to do, because those can really be the best advocates. Like you really don't want somebody, talking about your project on your behalf who like doesn't get you at all.
Okay, so this is then my last question. It's a perfect segue, actually, which is like, what do you think we as a global documentary community could be doing better to support African filmmaking talents?
Yeah, so one of the programs I didn't mention, because it is specific to US based filmmakers, is we have a new program, a new initiative we started, I think in 2020, called our research grant.
Mm-hmm.
So the way my colleague Megan likes to frame it is we're putting the R back in R&D,
Mm-hmm.
really thinking about earliest stage, how do we kind of support filmmakers so that they are even better positioned to be able to develop and launch their films.
Mm-hmm.
And so our research program, I think, is unique because it provides 5 filmmakers with, funding, and 6 months of kind of dedicated mentorship, and a dedicated advisor. This particular grant is intended to give a filmmaker literally 6 months to just think about whether this project is viable at all. And
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the program, a filmmaker could decide, actually, maybe this is like a podcast, or maybe this is like a book or something else. And to us, that is success, because it means we didn't, push somebody out there, give somebody, a grant and push them out there to try to make something that really wasn't formulated enough to succeed. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's that element of, how do we, in the world of kind of folks who are interested in supporting filmmakers holistically, not only think about it being, project-based successes, but
Mm-hmm.
really nurturing filmmakers and connecting filmmakers with one another, so that you have the infrastructure and you have the resources to pick the projects that are the most viable for you and your career,
Mm-hmm.
and know when other projects maybe, need to be kind of thought through a little bit more and return to later on. And I think that's really been, the joy of my life is seeing filmmakers kind of have these ideas and projects and maybe push other ones forward, and then have the ability through the successes of the ones that are viable to come
Mm-hmm.
back and produce those other projects,
Mm-hmm.
with everything that they need to be able to do it well, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I think that's really interesting. And then also
Mm-hmm.
just more opportunities for filmmakers, for African talent, um, to be out there and to connect. And Africa is like the way that I feel about this term African talent is the same way I feel about the term Asian talent, and that there are so many. I mean, how can one?
Such a big place.
It's like, come on. And so I often think that there's that element of kind of shared, like solidarity in that, how can one compare, Busan and, what I mean? Like the other, and even within like other regions in terms of like, there are forums and there are places and there are markets that have existed for years, like when I think about Nollywood, when I think about all of these spaces where there are cinematic traditions and trajectories, that maybe not everybody, and even myself, is limited, but again, it's like trying to kind of, there's nuance, right, in that. And so I think that even within that idea of like, how is African talent being defined, it within and without, like does the West have a particular, in America specifically, have a particular problematic generalization of what it means when it thinks about, that term. And I think that is a important place to start, perhaps.
Thank you so much for this great discussion in my evening and your morning. Where are you traveling this year? Where might a filmmaker meet you?
Yeah, so I just returned from Sundance, and March, virtual festivals. So virtually, I'll be participating in AIDC this year, as well as Thessaloniki, and then I'll be on the ground on the mentorship tables at South by Southwest. So that's my plan, and we're kind of figuring out the rest of the year as it goes. But that's what our first quarter is looking like. My colleague Megan, typically, and she's again the CPO, so she's really, if folks are interested, that's the team that oversees the grant programs and everything from our research development. They're in the throes of our development applications currently, wrapping up our research, and we'll be announcing that soon. But typically you can find her at places like Big Sky, CPH Docs, occasionally IDFA. And so, we're really thinking about, and again, we're a smaller organization. There's really only 4 of us, believe it or not. It's a little organization, small but mighty is what we say. And so, I think the advent of, or the normalization of kind of virtual opportunities to engage has really been quite wonderful for us, especially because we're based not in, New York or LA, but we're actually based in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has its own unique kind of documentary community and culture.
Thank you for this very generous conversation.
Thank you for having me, and good luck to all.
Okay, bye.